Marcus Chun walked through the steel corridors of Detention Block 7 for the thousandth time. His footsteps echoed against the metal floors of the orbital prison station that floated in the void between Earth and Mars. He had been a guard here for 5 years, watching over the worst criminals humanity had to offer. Murderers, terrorists, traitors to the Solar Federation. They all ended up here, forgotten by the universe. But today felt different. The warden had assigned him to a new section, one he'd never visited before. Section Omega. The other guards whispered about it in the break room, but nobody seemed to know what kind of prisoners were kept there. Just one inmate, the warden had told him. Prisoner 2847. He's been here longer than anyone. Your job is simple. Check on him twice a day, make sure he's still alive, and deliver his meals. Marcus found the cell at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. Unlike the other cells with their transparent aluminum walls, this one was solid steel with only a small window at eye level. He peered inside and saw an old man sitting on a simple cot. The prisoner had gray hair that reached his shoulders and wore the standard orange jumpsuit. What struck Marcus most were the man's eyes. They held a depth of sadness that seemed infinite. Food delivery, Marcus announced through the speaker system. The old man looked up slowly. Thank you, he said in a voice that sounded rusty from disuse. Would you stay for a moment? It's been so long since I've had company. Marcus hesitated. Protocol said minimal interaction with prisoners, but something in the man's voice made him pause. I can't stay long. Understand. The prisoner gestured to a small table in his cell. On it sat a chessboard, the pieces arranged in starting position. Do you play? A little, Marcus admitted. He'd learned from his grandfather years ago. Perhaps you could indulge an old man. Just one game. Marcus checked his watch. He had time before his next round. Against his better judgment, he found himself pulling up a chair outside the cell. There was a matching chessboard on a small shelf. Apparently, previous guards had played through the bars. They began to play in silence. Marcus expected the old man to be rusty, but each move was precise and calculated. The prisoner's fingers moved the pieces with an elegance that seemed out of place in the harsh environment of the prison. You play well, the old man said after capturing Marcus's knight. It's been years since I've had a real opponent. How long have you been here? Marcus asked, then caught himself. He wasn't supposed to ask personal questions. The prisoner's sad smile deepened. I've lost count. Time moves differently when you have nothing but walls to look at. Sometimes I wonder if I've always been here, if the world outside was just a dream. They played for an hour. Marcus lost, but it was close. As he stood to leave, the old man spoke again. Will you come back tomorrow? I have to. It's my job. I meant, will you play again? Marcus looked at the lonely figure behind the bars. Whatever this man had done, he'd clearly been here for a very long time. What harm could one game a day do? Sure, Marcus said. Same time tomorrow. The old man's face lit up with the first genuine smile Marcus had seen in the prison. Thank you. You don't know what this means to me. As Marcus walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about prisoner 2847. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it all suggested someone who had once been much more than a common criminal. Over the following weeks, their daily chess games became a routine. Marcus would arrive with the morning meal, and they would play while the prisoner ate. The old man never spoke about his past or his crimes, and Marcus never asked. They talked about chess strategies, about the books in the small prison library, about the stars visible through the tiny window in the cell. Do you know the Andromedan defense? The prisoner asked one day, demonstrating a complex series of moves. I developed it myself many years ago. Developed it? You mean you created a chess strategy? The old man caught himself, a flash of something. Fear? Regret? Crossing his face. I read about it. In a book. Yes, in a book. But Marcus had already noticed other things. The way the prisoner held himself with perfect posture despite his age. The slight accent that suggested education in the finest schools of Earth. The intricate knowledge of military history that slipped out during their conversations. Who were you? Marcus finally asked one day. Before this place? The prisoner's hand froze over a bishop. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, I was someone who made choices. Wrong choices. And now I pay for them. Everyone here made wrong choices. Not like mine. The old man moved his bishop, putting Marcus in check. Some choices echo through history. Some mistakes cost more than one life. They cost entire worlds their future. Marcus wanted to press further, but the pain in the prisoner's eyes stopped him. Whatever this man had done, he was already serving the ultimate punishment, a lifetime of solitude with nothing but his memories. Their games continued. Marcus found himself looking forward to them, even bringing coffee to share through the meal slot. The prisoner was brilliant, teaching Marcus strategies he'd never seen in any chess book. It was like learning from a grandmaster. One day, Marcus arrived to find the prisoner staring at the small window, watching the stars. "Do you ever see ships pass by?" the old man asked. "Sometimes. Supply vessels, mostly. The occasional diplomatic cruiser." The prisoner nodded slowly. "I used to travel among those stars. I knew every trade route, every habitable world in 3 sectors. Now I can only see a handful through a window the size of my palm." "You were a pilot?" "Among other things." The prisoner turned back to the chessboard. "Shall we play?" But something was different that day. The prisoner's moves were more aggressive, more desperate. He sacrificed pieces carelessly, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Is everything all right?" Marcus asked. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he moved a pawn. "Do you know what date it is?" "Tuesday." "No, I mean the date. The full date." Marcus told him, and the prisoner closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. 50 years, he whispered. "It's been 50 years to the day." "Since what?" The prisoner didn't answer. He just stared at the board, lost in memories that Marcus could only imagine. Finally, he spoke in a voice so quiet Marcus had to lean forward to hear. "Since I lost everything. Since I failed everyone who believed in me. Since the empire fell." The word empire sent a chill down Marcus's spine. There had only been one empire in recent history. The Terran Empire that had ruled half the galaxy before the revolution that created the Solar Federation. But that was decades ago, and all the imperial leadership had been executed or had died in the war. Or so the history books said. Marcus looked at the man across from him with new eyes. The bearing, the education, the strategic mind that could create new chess defenses. It all started to make a terrible kind of sense. "We should finish our game," the prisoner said, his voice steady again. "Your move, I believe." Marcus moved his queen, his mind racing. If his suspicions were correct, he was sitting across from one of the most significant figures in human history. A man who had once commanded fleets, ruled worlds, shaped the destiny of billions. Now reduced to playing chess in a cell, forgotten by the galaxy he had once ruled. They finished their game in silence. As Marcus prepared to leave, the prisoner spoke one more time. "Thank you, Marcus, for the games, for the conversation, for treating me as a human being instead of a monster." "You're not a monster," Marcus said automatically. The old man smiled sadly. "You don't know what I've done. The lives that were lost because of my pride, my ambition. But here in this cell, playing chess with you for a few moments each day, I can pretend I'm just an old man enjoying a game with a friend." Marcus left that day with his mind in turmoil. He went to the prison archives that night, searching through classified files he technically shouldn't have access to. Most records about prisoner 2847 were sealed, but he found fragments. References to his special detention, orders signed by the highest levels of the Federation government, and one partially redacted document that mentioned the former emperor being kept in permanent solitary confinement as part of a secret agreement that ended the Civil War. The next morning, Marcus stood outside cell 2847 with the breakfast tray, his heart pounding. When he looked through the window, the prisoner was already sitting at the chessboard, waiting. "Good morning, Marcus," the old man said with his usual sad smile. "Shall we play?" Marcus entered his side of the divided space and sat down. As he set up his pieces, he made a decision. It didn't matter who this man had been. Emperor, tyrant, war criminal, that was the past. Here and now, he was just a lonely old man who had spent decades in solitude, paying for sins that Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "Your move," Marcus said, and they began to play. Their games took on a new dimension after that. The prisoner seemed to sense that Marcus knew, or at least suspected, the truth. He began to share more stories. Carefully edited, names and places changed, but Marcus could read between the lines. Tales of grand palaces and devastating battles, of political intrigue and impossible choices, of an empire that grew too large and a man who couldn't hold it together. The problem with absolute power, the prisoner said one day, sacrificing his queen in a move that would lead to victory 5 turns later, is that when you fall absolutely. There's no middle ground, no gentle landing, just the complete erasure of everything you were. Do you regret it? Marcus asked. The empire, I mean. If you could go back. I regret many things. But mostly I regret the cost. The believers who died for a cause I couldn't sustain. The worlds that burned because I wouldn't compromise. The future I stole from humanity because I thought I alone knew what was best. He moved his bishop, completing a trap Marcus hadn't seen coming. But perhaps that's why I'm here. Not just as punishment, but as a reminder, a living cautionary tale that no one will ever hear. I hear it, Marcus said quietly. The prisoner looked up, surprised. Yes, he said after a moment. Yes, you do. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it's all the legacy I deserve. One man who knows my story and still chooses to sit across from me each day. Weeks turned to months. Their chess games became the highlight of both their days. Marcus learned more than just chess strategies. He learned about leadership, about the weight of command, about the terrible arithmetic of ruling where every decision cost lives. The prisoner never glorified his past or made excuses. He simply shared the wisdom bought with unimaginable pain. One day, Marcus arrived to find the prisoner looking frilier than usual. His moves were slower, his breathing more labored. Are you ill? Should I call the medical unit? No, the old man said. I'm just tired, Marcus. So very tired. But not too tired for our game. They played, but Marcus could see the effort it took. When the game ended, another victory for the prisoner. As usual, the old man leaned back in his chair. I want to thank you, he said. These months, they've meant more than you know. You've given me something I thought I'd never have again. What's that? A friend. The prisoner smiled, and for once it wasn't sad. Someone who sees me not as the emperor, not as the tyrant, but just as myself. Do you know how rare that is? How precious. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. The honor has been mine. I've learned more from you than from any teacher I've ever had. Then perhaps I've done one good thing in this cell. Perhaps that balances the scales just a little. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the old man alone in his cell, carrying the weight of an empire's fall on his shoulders. When his shift started the next morning, he practically ran to Section Omega. The cell was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus looked through the window and saw the prisoner sitting in his chair by the chessboard, perfectly still. Even before he called for the medical team, he knew Emperor Kalen Dracos, the last ruler of the Terran Empire, had died as he had lived his last years, quietly forgotten by history, with only a prison guard to mourn his passing. On the chessboard, the pieces were arranged in a specific pattern. It took Marcus a moment to recognize it. It was the Andromedan defense, the strategy the Emperor had created. But there was one piece out of place. The White King lay on its side in the center of the board. Checkmate. The prison officials came, forms were filed, and prisoner 2847 was listed as deceased. No announcement was made. No ceremony held. The cell was cleaned and sealed, awaiting its next occupant. But Marcus kept the chess set, and sometimes late at night, he would set up the board and play through the games he remembered, hearing the old emperor's voice in his mind, teaching him one more time about sacrifice, strategy, and the strange paths that redemption can take. He never told anyone about his chess partner's true identity. That secret would die with him, just as the emperor had wished. But he would always remember the lesson learned in that small cell, that even the mightiest can fall, that even the worst can seek redemption, and that sometimes the simple act of playing chess with a lonely prisoner can be the most human thing in the universe. In his apartment, Marcus kept a photo he'd taken secretly one day, just the chessboard through the cell bars, the prisoner's weathered hands moving a piece. Below it, he wrote a simple inscription. He taught me that empires rise and fall, but a good game of chess is forever. And in the vast darkness between Earth and Mars, Detention Block 7 continued its silent orbit, carrying its secrets and its stories, while somewhere in the administrative files, the legend of prisoner 2847 was reduced to a single line: deceased. No next of kin. Personal effects disposed. But for Marcus Chun, the Emperor would live on in every game of chess he played, in every strategic decision he made, in every moment when he chose compassion over protocol. The galaxy might have forgotten its last emperor, but one prison guard would always remember the man who had once ruled the stars and found his final piece over a chessboard in the smallest of cells. 0.5 years had passed since Emperor Kalen Dracos died in his cell. Marcus Chun had been promoted to security chief of Detention Block 7, but he still kept the old chess set in his office. Sometimes he would look at it and remember the quiet wisdom of the fallen emperor who had taught him so much more than just chess. The prison had changed. New inmates arrived, old ones were transferred or died. Section Omega remained sealed, officially listed as under renovation, though no work was ever done. Marcus had made sure of that. It felt wrong to put another prisoner where the Emperor had spent his final years. Then came the message that changed everything. Marcus was reviewing security protocols when his terminal flashed with a priority alert. High-level encryption, origin unknown. His finger hovered over the delete button. Unauthorized communications were forbidden in the prison. But something made him open it. The message was simple. The Emperor's legacy lives. The time of revelation approaches. Guard the truth well, Marcus Chun. His blood ran cold. No one knew about his relationship with prisoner 2847. He'd never told anyone, never left any records. How could someone know? Before he could analyze further, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed as the automated system announced. Security breach in Central Archives. All units respond. Marcus ran toward the archives, his mind racing. The Central Archives held all prisoner records, including the sealed files of Section Omega. As he arrived, he found the archive door torn open, its heavy security lock shattered by some kind of explosive device. Inside, amid scattered files and destroyed terminals, stood a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, with short black hair and intense green eyes that seemed oddly familiar. She wore a maintenance worker's uniform, but the way she moved spoke of military training. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded, drawing his weapon. The woman turned slowly, raising her hands. But she was smiling. "Hello, Marcus. I've been looking forward to meeting you. What do you know my name? My grandfather told me about you. About the chess games. About the kindness you showed him when the rest of the galaxy wanted to forget he existed." Marcus's weapon wavered. "Your grandfather?" "Emperor Kalen Dracos. I'm Lyra Dracos, his granddaughter. And I need your help." "That's impossible." The entire imperial family was executed. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Lyra slowly reached in her pocket and pulled out a small device. When she activated it, a hologram appeared, the Emperor but younger, holding a baby. "My mother was his daughter from a secret marriage. When the Empire fell, loyalists smuggled us out. We've been hiding in the outer colonies for decades." Marcus kept his weapon raised, but didn't fire. The resemblance was there. Now that he looked, the same intelligent eyes, the same proud bearing despite the circumstances. "Even if you're telling the truth, why are you here? Why risk exposing yourself?" Lyra's expression hardened. "Because the Federation has been lying to everyone. My grandfather didn't start the Civil War. He was trying to prevent it. And I have proof." She gestured to the scattered files. "I came for his real records, the ones they sealed. The truth about what really happened 50 years ago. Security teams are already on their way," Marcus warned. "You have maybe 3 minutes before this place is swarming with guards." "Then, help me," Lyra said urgently. "You knew him. You saw who he really was, not the monster they made him out to be. Don't you want to know the truth?" Marcus thought of all those chess games, all those conversations. The Emperor had never claimed innocence, but he'd also never told his full story. Maybe it was time the galaxy knew. "The real files aren't here," Marcus said, lowering his weapon. They're in Section Omega. His cell. Lyra's eyes widened. You kept them there? I kept everything there. Sealed it after he died. I'm probably the only one who can access it now. He made a decision that would change his life forever. Follow me. Quickly. They ran through the corridors, Marcus using his security codes to lock doors behind them, buying precious time. As they reached Section Omega, he could hear pursuit teams getting closer. The Emperor's cell looked exactly as it had 5 years ago. Marcus had ordered it preserved, though he couldn't have said why at the time. Now he understood. Some part of him had always known this day would come. Behind the chessboard, Marcus said, he kept something hidden there. I found it after he died, but never looked inside. Lyra pulled away the board to reveal a small compartment. Inside was a data cylinder, old, but still functional. When she activated it, holographic documents filled the air, treaties, communications, military orders. My God! Marcus breathed as he read. The Federation Council. They were the ones who ordered the colony bombardments. They blamed it on your grandfather. He refused to attack civilian targets. Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. So they did it themselves and used it as justification for the rebellion. 30 million dead, all to destroy one man who wouldn't play their game. The sound of cutting tools echoed from the corridor. Security was breaking through Marcus's lockdown. We need to go, Marcus said. There's an old maintenance shaft that leads to the docking bay. But, Lyra, even with this proof, they'll never let you leave the station alive. She clutched the data cylinder. I have to try. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. Marcus made another life-altering decision. Then, I'm coming with you. I know their security protocols, their patrol patterns. Your grandfather saved my life in a way, gave me purpose when I was just going through the motions. Time to return the favor. They crawled through the maintenance shaft as security forces flooded Section Omega behind them. Marcus guided them through the labyrinth of pipes and conduits he'd memorized during his years at the prison. Tell me about him, Lyra whispered as they moved. My mother had stories, but they were from before. What was he like at the end? Tired, Marcus said honestly, carrying the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. But also at peace in a way. He found something in those chess games. A simple human connection that meant more to him than all the power he'd once held. They emerged in the docking bay to find it in chaos. Alarms blared as security teams searched for them. A small courier ship sat unguarded near the far wall, probably how Lyra had arrived. That's our way out, Lyra said. But as they moved toward it, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Commander Walsh, head of prison security and Marcus's direct superior. Going somewhere, Chun? Walsh asked, weapon drawn. I have to say, I'm disappointed. 5 years of exemplary service thrown away for what? Some girl with a fairy tale? Look at the evidence, Walsh, Marcus urged. The Emperor was innocent of the worst crimes. The Federation has been lying to us for 50 years. Walsh shook his head. I don't care. My job is to keep prisoners in and intruders out, not to play historian. Then you'll have to shoot me, Marcus said, stepping in front of Lyra, because I won't let you stop her. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Walsh sighed and lowered his weapon. You know what? I'm 3 months from retirement. I'm too old for this. He stepped aside. I'll give you a 5-minute head start before I report the ship stolen. After that, you're on your own. Marcus grabbed Lyra's hand, and they ran for the ship. As they boarded, she turned back to look at the prison station one last time. He died in there alone, she said softly. My grandfather, who once commanded fleets of thousands, died alone in a cell. No, Marcus corrected as he started the launch sequence. He died with a friend. And now that friend is going to help make sure his story is told. The ship launched just as security forces flooded the docking bay. Marcus plotted a course for the outer colonies, somewhere they could release the data without Federation interference. They'll brand us as terrorists, Lyra warned. Enemies of the state. We'll be hunted across the galaxy. Your grandfather once told me that some truths are worth any price, Marcus replied. I think it's time we found out if he was right. As the prison station disappeared behind them, Marcus thought about those chess games. Every move had been teaching him, preparing him for this moment. The emperor had known someone would come eventually, and he made sure Marcus would be ready. The journey to the outer colonies took 3 weeks. During that time, Marcus and Lyra studied the data cylinder's contents, uncovering more evidence of the Federation's crimes. They found records of secret executions, hidden prison camps, and systematic suppression of any information that contradicted the official history. He knew all of this, Lyra said one night as they reviewed military communications. He could have exposed them during the war, used it as propaganda. Why didn't he? Marcus remembered something the Emperor had said during one of their games. He told me once that revealing the truth in anger only breeds more anger. He said the truth should come out when people are ready to hear it, not as a weapon, but as a path to healing. 50 years later, Lyra mused. Maybe now they're ready. They landed on Haven, a colony world that maintained independence from the Federation. The local government, always happy to embarrass their larger neighbor, provided protection and a platform to release the information. The revelation sent shockwaves across human space. The data was too detailed, too well documented to be fake. Suddenly, the accepted history of the Civil War was in question. Protests erupted on Federation worlds. Historians demanded access to sealed archives. Veterans who had fought against the Empire began questioning what they'd really been fighting for. The Federation response was swift and predictable. Marcus and Lyra were declared terrorists, accused of fabricating evidence to destabilize the government. Bounty hunters were dispatched. Military forces were put on alert. But something unexpected happened. Messages began arriving from across the galaxy. From former Imperial soldiers who had gone into hiding, from Federation officers who had suspected the truth, from ordinary citizens who remembered the Empire as something more than the tyranny it had been painted as. One message stood out. It came from Admiral Sarah Knox, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Federation fleet. I served under Emperor Dracos as a young lieutenant. Her message read, I knew him to be an honorable man. I've carried doubts about the official story for 50 years. It's time for the truth, whatever the cost. I'm prepared to testify before the Galactic Council. Within months, the movement had grown beyond anything Marcus or Lyra could have imagined. The truth revelation, as historians would later call it, spread from world to world. More evidence emerged from hidden caches and sealed archives. The Federation's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Marcus found himself in a role he'd never expected, a speaker, a witness to history. He told the story of Prisoner 2847, of the chess games and conversations, of an emperor who had accepted his fate with dignity while carrying secrets that could have changed everything. He could have fought, Marcus would tell crowds. Even from his cell, he could have started a movement, revealed the truth, maybe even sparked another civil war. But he chose silence. He chose to bear the blame rather than tear the galaxy apart again. That's the man I knew. That's the emperor they don't want you to remember. Lyra became a different kind of leader. Unlike her grandfather, she had no interest in ruling. Instead, she dedicated herself to reforming the historical record, to ensuring that future generations would know the complex truth rather than simple propaganda. The Federation fought back, of course. They tried to suppress the movement, arrest its leaders, maintain their version of history. But truth, once released, is impossible to recapture. Too many people had seen the evidence. Too many questions have been raised. A year after their escape from the prison, Marcus and Lyra stood before the Galactic Council. The session was broadcast across human space, trillions watching as the granddaughter of the last emperor presented her case. I'm not here to rehabilitate my grandfather's image, Lyra said, her voice clear and strong. He made mistakes. The Empire had flaws. But he was not the monster you were taught to fear. He was a man who tried to hold together a government that had grown too large, faced impossible choices, and ultimately chose to sacrifice his own legacy rather than see more worlds burn. She presented the evidence methodically, document by document. When she finished, she had one more surprise. There's someone else who should speak. Someone who knew my grandfather not as the emperor, but as a man. Marcus took the podium, his prison guard uniform replaced by civilian clothes, but his bearing still that of a man who had stood watch over the worst and best of humanity. He told them about the chess games, about conversations on philosophy and leadership, about an old man who had found peace in the smallest of cells and friendship with the least likely of people. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Marcus concluded. "I'm not asking you to forget the war or its cost. I'm asking you to remember that history is complex, that heroes and villains are often the same people seen from different angles, and that the truth, the real truth, is always more important than comfortable lies." The council voted to open all sealed records, to commission an independent investigation into the Civil War. It would take years to untangle 5 decades of deception, but the process had begun. As they left the council chambers, Lyra turned to Marcus. What would he think of all this? Marcus smiled, remembering the sad wisdom in the Emperor's eyes. "I think he'd be proud of you. But more than that, I think he'd be relieved. The truth he carried alone for so long is finally free." "And you?" Lyra asked. "What will you do now?" Marcus thought about it. His old life was gone. He could never return to the prison, to the simple routine of security rounds and incident reports. But in losing that life, he'd found purpose he'd never expected. "I think I'll write a book," he said. "The complete games of Emperor Kalendrakos. Each one was a lesson, not just in chess, but in life. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned to play the way he did." Lyra smiled, and for a moment Marcus could see her grandfather in her eyes. Not the Emperor, not the prisoner, but the man who had found meaning in the simplest of human connections. They walked out into the bright sunshine of a new day, leaving behind the shadows of the past. Somewhere among the stars, Detention Block 7 continued its orbit, Section Omega still sealed and empty. But the man who had died, there was no longer forgotten, no longer defined only by his fall. He was remembered as he had lived in his final years, as a teacher, a philosopher, and a friend who had shown that even in the darkest cell, humanity could flourish over a simple game of chess. The revolution that followed was quiet, fought not with weapons but with words and evidence. The Federation didn't fall as the Empire had. Instead, it transformed slowly and sometimes painfully into something more honest. Truth and reconciliation commissions were established. Hidden histories were revealed. The complex reality of the Civil War replaced the simple narrative of good versus evil. And through it all, Marcus kept playing chess, teaching others the strategies he'd learned in that lonely cell. Each game was a reminder that empires rise and fall, but the connections between people, the simple act of sitting across from someone and sharing time and thought, that was eternal. In schools across the galaxy, children learned a new version of history, not one that painted the Empire as perfect or the Federation as evil, but one that showed the messy complexity of human governance, the difficulty of choices when millions of lives hang in the balance. They learned about Emperor Kalendrakos, the man who had ruled half the galaxy, and died in a cell smaller than most of their bedrooms. They learned about the prison guard who had seen past the propaganda to the human being beneath. They learned that truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of surfacing. And some of them, inspired by the story, learned to play chess. 20 years had passed since the truth revelation changed the galaxy. Marcus Chun, now in his 60s with silver threading through his hair, stood before the newly completed Memorial of Reconciliation on Earth. The massive structure rose from the heart of Geneva, where the old Federation Parliament had once stood. Now it housed something far more important: the complete, unfiltered history of humanity's greatest conflict. Beside him stood Lyra Dracos, no longer the fierce young woman who had broken into a prison, but a seasoned diplomat who had spent 2 decades working to heal the wounds of the past. Together, they had traveled from world to world, gathering stories, uncovering truth, and slowly rebuilding trust between those who had fought on opposite sides of the Civil War. He would have been amazed by this, Lyra said, looking up at the memorial spire that reached toward the stars. A place where both Federation and Empire are remembered honestly. Marcus nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the chess piece he always carried, a white king from the set he'd shared with the emperor. He once told me that the greatest victory isn't conquering your enemy, but turning them into a friend. It just took us 50 years to understand what he meant. The memorial's opening ceremony would begin soon. Representatives from every human world were gathering, including some Marcus had never thought he'd see in the same room. Former Federation generals stood beside Imperial veterans. Children and grandchildren of those who had died on both sides came together in shared remembrance. But first, there was one more visit to make. A shuttle took them back to Detention Block 7, still operational but transformed. Section Omega had been converted into a museum, preserving Emperor Draco's cell exactly as it had been. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see where the last emperor had spent his final years, to understand the man beyond the myth. Marcus led Lyra through the familiar corridors, memories flooding back with each step. When they reached the cell, a group of students was already there, listening to a holographic recreation of one of Marcus's lectures about the emperor. Can you imagine? One young student whispered to another. The most powerful man in the galaxy, reduced to this tiny cell. But, look, her companion replied, pointing to the chessboard still set up as it had been on the emperor's last day. He found something here. Peace, maybe, or understanding. Marcus smiled. The younger generation understood better than their parents sometimes. They hadn't lived through the propaganda, the hate, the fear. They could see the story for what it was, a deeply human tragedy about power, pride, and ultimately redemption. After the students left, Marcus and Lyra entered the cell. It felt smaller than Marcus remembered, but perhaps that was because he'd grown beyond the man who had once simply guarded prisoners. Now he was a historian, an author, a bridge between past and present. I have something for you, Lyra said, producing an ornate box. We found it in my grandmother's effects. She kept it hidden all these years. Inside was a chess set, carved from rare Andromedan crystal. The pieces seemed to glow with an inner light. But it was the inscription on the board that made Marcus's breath catch. For my teacher and friend, who showed me that empires are built on fear, but friendships are built on understanding. Kade, he had this made for you, Lyra explained. Before the war ended, he always hoped to give it to someone who would understand. My grandmother saved it, knowing that someday someone would play chess with him. Marcus finished, tears in his eyes. He knew. Even then, he knew he'd find a friend in his captivity. They set up the board on the small table, the crystal pieces catching the light. As they began to play, using the same opening the Emperor had taught Marcus so many years ago, the cell seemed less like a prison and more like a classroom where the greatest lessons of power and humility had been taught. You know what strikes me most? Lyra said as she moved her knight. He could have escaped. We found evidence that loyalists tried to break him out multiple times. He refused. He told me once that a prison you choose is freedom compared to a throne you're chained to, Marcus replied. I think he found more truth in this cell than in all his palaces. Their game was interrupted by an alert on Lyra's communicator. The memorial ceremony was about to begin. They carefully packed away the crystal chess set. It would have a place of honor in Marcus's home, where he still taught young players the strategies of a fallen emperor. The ceremony was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. No military parades, no displays of power. Instead, citizens from hundreds of worlds shared their stories. A Federation soldier spoke of the Imperial medic who had saved his life. An Imperial civilian told of Federation troops who had protected her village during the retreat. The narrative of absolute enemies crumbled under the weight of individual humanity. When it came time for the keynote address, an unexpected figure took the podium. Sarah Knox, the admiral who had been among the first to support the truth revelation, was now over 90, but still sharp-eyed and strong-voiced. I served both the Empire and the Federation, she began. I've seen the best and worst of both. Today, we don't gather to declare one side righteous and the other evil. We gather to acknowledge that we are all capable of both great nobility and terrible cruelty. The measure of a civilization isn't in never falling, but in how we rise after the fall. She paused, her gaze finding Marcus and Lyra in the crowd. Emperor Kalen Dracos fell farther than any man in human history. But in his cell, playing chess with a prison guard, he found something that had eluded him on the throne: genuine human connection without the weight of power. His real legacy isn't the empire he lost, but the lesson he taught. That understanding between individuals can heal wounds that armies only deepen. After the ceremony, as delegates mingled and former enemies shook hands, Marcus found himself approached by a young woman in a prison guard's uniform. "Mr. Chun," she said nervously, "I'm Officer Torres. I work in Section Omega now, giving tours and maintaining the museum. I've read all your books, studied every game you documented. Would you teach me?" Marcus saw himself in her eager eyes, remembered standing outside that cell for the first time, unaware of how it would change his life. "Do you play chess?" "A little," she admitted, the same words he'd once spoken. "Then, let's find a board," Marcus said. "I have some strategies to share. They were taught to me by a man who understood that the most important moves aren't always on the board." As they walked back into the memorial, Lyra caught his arm. "You're passing it on. That's what teachers do," Marcus replied. "Your grandfather gave me more than chess lessons. He gave me purpose. The least I can do is share that gift." The memorial became more than a place of remembrance. It became a center of learning, where the complex history of the Civil War was studied not for blame, but for understanding. The chessboards in the Emperor's cell were never empty. Players from across the galaxy came to sit where Marcus and Kalen had sat, to play the game that had bridged the gap between guard and prisoner, between Federation and Empire, between past and future. Marcus published his final book that year, Endgame, The Last Lessons of the Last Emperor. It wasn't just about chess or history. It was about the power of simple human kindness to transform the darkest places into spaces of light. The book ended with the position of the chessboard on the Emperor's last day, the Andromedan defense, with a white king toppled in the center. "Some might see this as surrender," Marcus wrote, "but I see it as the Emperor's final move, choosing to end the game on his own terms, leaving behind not bitterness, but a puzzle for others to solve. How do we move forward when the king has fallen? How do we build something better from the pieces left on the board?" The answer, Marcus had learned over the years, lay not in grand gestures or political movements, but in individual choices. Every person who chose understanding over hatred, every former enemy who became a friend, every child who learned the complex truth instead of simple propaganda. They were all continuing the game the Emperor had started in his cell. Years passed. Marcus grew older, his movement slower, but his mind still sharp. He continued to teach, to write, to bridge the gaps between people. Lyra went on to become the first director of Interstellar Reconciliation, working to prevent future conflicts by addressing their roots in misunderstanding and fear. On Marcus's 80th birthday, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single chess piece, a white king carved from a material he didn't recognize. It seemed to shift and change as he looked at it, sometimes appearing to be stone, sometimes metal, sometimes pure light. A note accompanied it. "For the guardian of truth, the keeper of stories, the friend who saw beyond the crown. Your moves continue to ripple across the board of history. Play on." It was unsigned, but Marcus knew. Somewhere out there, people who had served the Emperor, who had believed in something beyond mere power, were watching. They had seen what he and Lyra had accomplished, how they had transformed a legacy of war into one of understanding. Marcus placed the shifting king on his mantle, next to the crystal set and the original pieces from a prison. Each set told a part of the story: the humble beginning, the hidden preparation, and now the endless possibility of what came next. He often thought about that first day, walking into Section Omega with a meal tray, finding an old man who just wanted someone to play chess with. Such a small moment, yet it had changed the course of history. Not through violence or revolution, but through the simple act of seeing another person's humanity. The true empire, Marcus had come to understand, wasn't built on worlds or fleets or power. It was built one connection at a time, one game at a time, one choice at a time, to see others not as enemies or allies, but as fellow players in the grand game of existence. In schools across the galaxy, children learn the Andromedan defense. But more than the chess moves, they learn the story behind it, of an emperor who fell and a guard who caught not his body but his wisdom. They learned that prisons could become classrooms, enemies could become teachers, and the smallest acts of kindness could echo across generations. The memorial grew over the years, adding new wings, new stories, new truths uncovered from the hidden corners of history. But at its heart remained that simple cell with its chessboard, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could be found if someone was willing to look for it. Marcus continued to visit, continued to play, continued to teach. Each game was a conversation across time with a friend he'd found in the unlikeliest of places. And sometimes, late in the evening when the memorial was quiet and the stars shone through the windows, he could almost hear the Emperor's voice. "Your move, Marcus." And Marcus would smile, moving a piece forward, continuing a game that had begun in a prison cell and spread across the galaxy. A game not of conquest, but of connection, not of victory, but of understanding, not of power, but of the simple, transformative act of choosing to see the humanity in everyone. The legacy of Emperor Kalen Dracos lived on, not in monuments to his power, but in every act of reconciliation, every bridge built between former enemies, every child who learned that history's greatest lessons often came from its greatest failures. And in a small apartment on Earth, an old prison guard turned historian turned teacher set up his chessboard each evening, ready to play another game with anyone who wanted to learn. The pieces were worn smooth by countless hands, the board marked by years of use. But the lessons they carried were as fresh as that first day in Section Omega, when a lonely prisoner had asked a simple question: "Do you play?" The answer had changed everything. And it continued to change things still, one move at a time, one player at a time, one moment of human connection at a time. Because empires rise and fall, Marcus knew, but a good game of chess and the wisdom shared across the board, that was forever,